Good afternoon everyone, Country Flyboy here, and today, another basics tutorial. Now in this one, we're in the default 172 again. We're in the default 172 with the G1000 cockpit. I learned to fly in an airplane very similar to this one, and I tend to love the glass cockpits more than I do the standard cockpits. So I really like this one. Not really the default one, because the default one's terrible, but when I get add-on planes, I love glass cockpit. Anyway, today we're going to be talking a bit more advanced stuff. So throughout this tutorial series, I may have made references to pitch controlling altitude and throttle controlling airspeed, and then turn around and said pitch for airspeed and throttle for altitude. Well, that's because they both kind of do the same thing in that regard. They pitch also controls your speed and throttle controls your altitude, but at the same time the two also control the other thing. So what I wanted to show you was slow flight. Now slow flight is a condition we can put the plane in where we're flying so slow that we actually need to increase throttle to maintain a slower speed. So I'm gonna put us in a slow flight dirty situation. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring the throttle back, and I'm going to maintain altitude. So I'm going to use pitch to maintain altitude. And as we slow the plane down, top of the wide arc, flaps 10, VY, flaps 20, 65, flaps full. Now, as we slow down, I'm actually going to pitch up to maintain speed and give it throttle to maintain altitude. So I want to maintain 3,500. So I need throttle to maintain 3,500. I want to maintain a speed of between 40 and 50 knots. So I'm too fast, I need to pitch up. So as you can see in slow flight conditions, your controls are kind of reversed. You're on the backside of the power curve, as it's called. So you need to pitch up to slow down, and throttle controls your altitude. As you can see, in pitching up is not really climbing us very much, if at all. And we have a 15-degree nose-up pitch. One thing you may also notice is the plane is a little bit harder to control. For one, the ailerons are really mushy. Whoop, about stalled it there. The ailerons are really mushy. This is because there's not a lot of air flowing over the wings or the control surfaces. If you can think of the airspeed indicator as more of a measurement of how much air is going over the wings, not a measurement of speed. And if you look, I'm having to put a lot of rudder into it because the engine is spinning at a relatively high RPM. We're at 2100 almost. But we're moving so slow that there's not enough air going past the fuselage to keep us really stable. So that prop, which is spinning clockwise, is wanting to yaw the plane to the left. So I have to put a lot of right rudder in to keep the plane coordinated. Now we're too low, so I'm going to decrease power, or too high, I'm going to decrease power and descend. And as you can see, that decrease in power doesn't affect the airspeed that much. It does a little bit, but so you get it. You have to use both controls. Alright, so you know what? I'm going to put us in a flat spin. Wow, default planes don't spin worth a damn. I tried to put us in what's called a spin, but it didn't quite work. Alright, flaps are up. Let's descend down to 1,000 feet and head back to Brunswick Golden Isles. So, you get it. Slow flight conditions like that, it's both controls. One controls airspeed. When I say pitch for airspeed and throttle for altitude, that's how you got to think of it. But you're really using both to control both parts. So I'm going to send back to 1,000, and we're just going to enter the pattern for runway 7 at Brunswick Golden Isles.
File traffic, Cessna November 13312 is 9 miles south, 1,900. Inbound, touch and go, left traffic. Runway 7.
Alrighty, so we're on final for runway 7, touch and go, left traffic. Now, I want you to turn your attention to the white and red lights to the left of the runway. Again, not all runways in Flight Simulator have this. That is called the PAPI. The PAPI is a type of VASI, and VASI stands for Visual Approach Slope Indicator. PAPI stands for Precision Approach Path Indicator. It's a type of VASI. So, that indicates whether we are too high or too low. As you can see, there are 2 white lights and 2 red lights. This indicates that we are on the glide path. If we maintained 2 white and 2 red, we touch down on the runway right at the 1,000 foot markings. When we get closer to the runway, I'll go over the markings. Now you see we're 3 white, 1 red. This indicates we're too high. So we're actually slightly higher. 4 whites. Let me get to show 4 lights real quick. 4 lights indicates that we are high. So again, if I enter slew mode, there is 4 whites too high. There's 3 whites slightly high. 2 white, 2 red on glide slope. 3 red slightly low. Or 4 red dangerously low. Alright, so we'll just bring her in for a landing. As we get closer to the runway, I want you to turn your attentions to the markings on the runway. Again, every runway is different. They don't all have the same markings. Alrighty, so we are closing up right now. I'll pause. Okay, so this series of stripes right here at the end of the runway, those are called the threshold marks. Now, these actually indicate how wide the runway is. If it was 4 on either side, the runway is 100 feet wide. Runway here is about 125, 150 feet wide, I believe. The next marking up from that is obviously the runway number. Runways are numbered via magnetic heading. So if you see, we're on a magnetic heading of about 073 right now. So the runway is 070. So if you ever need to know a runway heading, just drop the last digit. 07 is 070. And of course, runway 9 is 090, runway 18 is 180, yada yada yada. Just add a 0 to the end and that will get you about the runway heading. So there's maximum, the highest number you can have on a runway is 36. Okay, the next stripes are similar to the threshold marks. We got a square formed by 3 stripes. This is the 500 foot marking. So 500 foot from the threshold. The next marking we have is 2 solid white squares. They are the 1,000 foot markings. 1,000 foot marks, I've heard them called aim marks, threshold, touchdown marks, you name it. I've heard them called it, but typically they're called 1,000 footers. Okay, so now you'll see the marks sort of decrease in number of lines as you go. They're in 500 foot intervals, so each marking is in 500 feet from the threat, and an additional 500 feet from the marking before it. So of these 1,000 footers, this is a 1,500, 2,500, and so on. So the markings indicate how far you've gone from the threshold. The last stripe is 3,000 feet from the threshold. That's the whole setup forms the touchdown zone. So if you were flying on an ILS approach, you want to touch down somewhere between the 1,000 foot markings and the 3,000 foot markings. That's your aim point. If you follow the glide slope on the PAPI, then they will have you touch down exactly at 1,000 foot markings. That's where they're calibrated to. Alright, so when flying, you want to touch down somewhere between these 2 points. Now, runway center lines are to precise measurements as well. Runway center lines are 150 feet long, and they're 50 feet spacing. So from the top of from the bottom of one line to the bottom of the next line is 200 feet. Now, if this was flying at night, you could see the runway lights. Runway lights are in 200 foot intervals. So you can get an idea of the length and the width of the runway simply by looking at it. Alright, so we're going to aim to touch down somewhere between the 1,000-foot markings and the 3,000-foot markings. And we're going to do a touch and go this time. Now, I say you want to aim to touch down somewhere between these markings. It's okay if you touch down before them. You just don't want to touch down on or before the runway numbers. You want to touch down beyond the runway number.
1 mile west inbound, visual, runway 28.
Alright, so that was a good touch and go. I'm going to select our next landing to be a full stop. Alright, we're coming back in on final. Flaps are full. We are just above the glide slope, 65 knots. This is a nice stable approach. Now, we're full stop this time. I'm going to show you what full braking is. Take note, we have full flaps right now. Now, what I'm going to do is called max braking in this airplane. Now, this works for most general aviation airplanes. Works best in high-wing airplanes like the Cessna, but it'll also work in lower-wing planes like the Mooney. Alright, so max braking is the method you use to getting the airplane stopped quickly. I will bet you money that I will touch down on the 1,000-foot markings and I can get them stopped in less than 1,000 feet. So I'll touch down on the 1,000-foot markings and stop the plane completely in less than 1,000 feet using max braking. So I'm going to go through max braking. Damn it, overshot it. Flaps up, back pressure, wheel brakes on. Okay, I touched down just beyond the 1,000-foot markings. And there's the 2,000-foot marking right in front of me. So if I look back, I can see my stripe probably touched down right about there, between those two runway stripes. So I went about 700 feet down the runway. I brought this plane to a complete stop in 700 feet. So what I did was when I touched down, once the wheels hit the ground, I raised the flaps up all the way, hitting F5 to raise the flaps up all the way. I applied the wheel brakes, and then I gave it full back pressure. What that does is in this order. Raising the flaps transfers weight off of the wings and onto the wheels, which increases the braking efficiency. The wheel brakes are obvious. I just gave it full wheel braking. The back pressure, however, may not be obvious. Note when I give it back pressure, even when I'm on the ground, the plane pitches up. And what happens when you pitch the plane up? It slows down. So by pitching the plane up, I slow it down even more. I'm almost using the wings as a sail, as the wings still have some amount of lift, and the air as we slow down on the runway hits the wings. If I pitch up slightly, it almost forces some of the air back forward, and that gives it a bit of a braking effect. That's called aerodynamic braking. And you can actually bring some planes to a complete stop. In fact, there are some planes out there that rely on aerodynamic braking. The F-15, for example.
Golden Mile traffic, Cessna November 13312 is clear of the runway.
Now, there's another thing I want to talk about before I end this video as I taxi to parking. And that is, when do you throw out the rule book? Now, throughout the series we've been going over the procedures that do different things in the sim, and as you learn more about whatever aircraft you're flying, you'll get into a routine and you'll start to learn the procedures of flying that plane. However, you'll be learning standard procedures of flying that plane. Let's give you a bit of an example. If we were flying in Atlanta, where there's just airlines galore, lots of airliners with a final of approach speed of about 140 knots coming into land, and we decided we wanted to fly the Cessna in there, we can do that. ATC cannot turn us away just because of the type of plane we're flying. They can't say, no, fuck off, you can't fly here. So they have to work us in with that traffic. Now, if all of those airliners were following the standard operating procedure of their aircraft, we would end up as the hood ornament on a 757. Because we have a slower final approach speed than theirs, so they would just run us down. However, they won't follow standard procedure. They'll slow down sooner than they normally would. They know when to throw the rule book out. Sometimes you actually have to take the rule book and your standard operating procedures and just chunk it out the window. So a good pilot knows when to do that. And it's really sort of hard to demo a setup like that because AI traffic and flight sim always follow the standard operating procedures of their aircraft. You don't necessarily have to. So let's say we were coming on final and we get a beam the runway numbers, which is normally when we would start descending, and we see there's traffic on final already. We want to work in behind them. Well, we can't start our descent. We'd have to extend the downwind, maintain level flight, extend the downwind until we are beam that traffic, then we can resume as normal. We have modified our standard operating procedure to work in with the traffic in a given situation. So you just gotta know when to tell the rulebook to fuck off. That's just something I wanted to talk about as we taxied in. Don't be afraid to throw the rulebook out, because sometimes you need to. Alrighty. Beacons. Okay, avionics, lights, and mixture. Magnetos, lights, master battery. Now we'll set that in. Our plane is completely shut down. Alright, so that has been the tutorial series. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Actually, I think I got one more video planned for after this one. So I hope you enjoyed the series thus far, and we will see you next time.